So, data security controls. There's certification and accreditation. Now, certification means you meet the requirements of the data owner, and accreditation means they accept that, because typically you'll put out a request for bids, and you'll specify in the bids, I want to hire a company or purchase a product that has these properties. And then the products are evaluated, and you decide if it meets the requirements, and then they decide to accept the certification and say, okay, I do agree that you in fact meet my requirements. This is important in places like college where you have government work where you're required to take the lowest bidder, and there are also other rules, like in San Francisco you must give priority to woman-owned businesses and to local businesses and things like that, so there's rules. You don't just get to buy something major. You have to put out a bid, you have to wait 30 days, you have to give everybody a chance to bid on it, and then you can determine which ones meet the requirements and go through a formal process. This is to try to stop people from effectively embezzling the money by arranging for their buddy to be chosen in a no-bid contract or something. So there's a lot of standards and control frameworks. PCI, data security standards, is for credit card data handling. We talked about that, payment card industry. Octave is one from Carnegie Mellon, and the ISO 27000 series we've talked about, which is the international one that's very big and complicated and expensive, but it does open the door to really big international contracts when you meet those standards. And COBIT from ISACA is another governance model. ITIL is a framework for IT service management, not particularly focused on security. And so anyway, whatever you have, you determine scoping. And this is something that I had to learn when I got involved in PCI compliance a little bit. You don't necessarily obey every letter of the rule. What you do is you can argue, and you can say, well, we don't use wireless encryption because in fact we have no wireless network with any data on it or something, and therefore even though we technically don't have the recommended wireless encryption, we have not violated that rule, that sort of thing. That's scoping, determining what part of the standards apply to you. And then there's tailoring, which is customizing a standard for an organization, so you can make arguments saying we don't have exactly what the standard requires, but we have some other compensating control that amounts to the same thing, or some similar argument like that. For example, 10 years after WEP was broken, wired equivalent privacy, you could still use it on a temporary basis and be PCI compliant, and this kind of thing is what helps explain why PCI is so spectacularly ineffective. Every company that got breached and lost their credit card numbers was of course PCI compliant, or they wouldn't have had any credit card numbers to steal. So clearly it's not strong enough to stop the breaches. But anyway, that's what we have. So to determine your controls, you've got to protect data at motion and data at rest. So drive and tape equipment is data at rest. And the idea is even if somebody physically breaks into your building and physically steals the server or the tape, you would like to protect that data. So typically you have whole disk encryption and hopefully whole tape encryption, so that even if people steal the data, they won't be able to read it without having the key. This is recommended for all mobile devices and mobile media. And if you do have a tape stolen, but it was encrypted, and you didn't also lose the key, then you can say there was not a breach. We did not really lose the data. Right, and if you have media, you typically have to store your backup data off-site because, of course, one of the threats you're worried about is what if the whole building burns down? Then if your backup was in the same building, it wouldn't be safe, so you put it somewhere else. You can put it in a bonded and insured company for off-site storage. With secure vehicles, Iron Mountain will do this. They will drive like an armored truck and take it away, so you know it is locked up and controlled all the way to be stored somewhere. Small companies used to use informal practices like just having an employee keep it at home in the closet or something, and that's not considered good enough for high importance data, of course, and there have been some cases where there have been breaches where an employee was driving it home and somebody broke in their car and stole the hard drive out of the back seat. So, you know, this is considered a sort of sloppy, unprofessional procedure, although it's what some companies I worked at used. But yeah, you wouldn't want to explain this to like a military contractor you were doing business with. If you got hacked and it just turned out you were doing sleazy things like this, they would say, why didn't you just hire a company to properly handle that important data? I, in fact, argued with the management about this years ago when I worked there. I said that backup tape is really important. That could destroy the whole company. We really ought to be handling that with more care and encrypting it. But at that time, that was seen as like outrageous and too difficult. Now I think people would listen more to that argument. And then there's protecting data in motion while it's moving from one server to another, and therefore you use end-to-end encryption. And this is why most companies have a VPN you have to connect to. If you connect from home, like everybody does these days, you typically come in through a virtual private network, so there's a layer of encryption on all that traffic, and they can have some confidence that you're not accidentally leaking it to other people in the coffee house and things like that. So let's try another Kahoot, which is here, 2C. I remember when the pandemic hit, a bunch of magazines said we're going to have tons of breaches because people will be handling data on their insecure home machines. As far as I can tell, that did not really happen. I didn't hear about a lot of breaches caused by that. I know the companies I consult for typically prevent that in intelligent ways, like they would give me a cloud machine on Azure and I remote into it. So none of the data is ever on my home system anyway. That's probably the right way to do it. My home system could be a week-old machine, out of date, missing patches, and it wouldn't matter. Some people I consult for did try to give me a laptop and make me use that laptop in their company VPN, which would be a little riskier, but I generally avoided that and used the cloud option when it was there. All right, which one is the international standard? Yep, ISO, the International Standard Organization, that's what it is. I think it's French or something, so the words are shut out of order, but that's it. That's the international one. All right. All right, which standard comes from ISACA? COBIT is the one from ISACA. All right. ISACA makes the CISA certification. All right, what process determines what portions of a standard an organization will use? That's the scope. What portion of this applies to us? All right. All right, and what do you have to do after a breach? You have to notify people. Typically, you have to notify customers whose data you lost, depending on state law, and you often have to notify regulatory agencies and business partners and such people like that, depending on how your business is regulated and the contracts you have with other businesses. Nobody wants to do it, but you have to do it. All right. All right. Another one So I'm going to stop this recording.